I am Grady Collane with the CapeCod.com News Center, and welcome to Sunday Journal. I'm joined today by a special guest from Barnstable County. Do you mind introducing yourself for our listeners?
Hello, I'm Vaira Harik. I'm the Assistant County Administrator for Barnstable County.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining me in studio today.
My pleasure. Thank you for asking us.
So we've had a long journey with the COVID-19 pandemic, and a lot of that involved funds from the American Rescue Plan Act. And so
Yes.
that is the main topic that we wanted to talk about today. About
Good.
$41 million to Barnstable County. We wanted to kind of follow up as that's starting to get towards the end. But I'm going to defer to you as the expert on this subject. Do you mind giving us a general update of where we are? Has it all been allocated? How much time do we have left in the timeline? Can you just elaborate more?
Sure. You know, as a consequence of the pandemic, in March of 2021, the American Rescue Plan Act was enacted by Congress, which caused funds to flow to all municipalities and counties in the country, and that includes Barnstable County. So we have county government, as well as our 15 towns. So each of our 15 towns on Cape Cod also received funds directly from the Treasury or through the state via the Treasury. But county government here in Barnstable County also we received $41.4 million. I'm rounding $41.4 million for regional purposes. So to provide an antidote to the effects of the COVID pandemic, that economic and infrastructural to some extent pandemic, and since receipt of those funds arrived later in 2021. We've been working to plan and then disperse these funds. And to answer your question, we are finished with the allocation process. In other words, all $41.4 million have been decided. It's been decided where they're going here within the county. And that process has taken place between our Regional Board of Commissioners and our Assembly of Delegates. And so we appreciate both of those bodies of county government coming together to make these decisions.
And it seems like it's been, in theory, it was several years that have been had to do this, but a snap of the fingers, are already halfway through 2023, so I imagine the timeline's been kind of coming up fast. It's been a long journey, but I was stunned to be following the meetings online and to see how fast all of this process has been going. And what was the deadline? Do you mind reminding us?
Yes, so we have until the end of December of 2024 to make decisions as to where the money is going to go, and then all of county as well as our subrecipients have until the end of 2026, depending on their contracts with us, to complete the ARPA work. So 2026 calendar. So the end of December of 2026 is when ARPA ends nationally, and all ARPA funds that have been allocated have to be spent by that time. Otherwise, they go back to the Treasury. We write a check back to the Treasury for the portion of the $41.4 million that isn't spent through December 31st of 2026. So naturally, we are reluctant to leave any money on the table for this windfall for Cape Cod.
That's very understandable. So what was the bulk of the money going towards? Can you talk about some of the biggest ticket topics or projects that received funding?
Now, we went through a very deliberate and thoughtful process about how to divide up $41 million, right? So about $1.2 million is going to the administrative costs of running the project. If you have a grant of any size, you have to administer it. And that takes some funds. And so about 1.2 is going to that, which is right around 3% of the amount. We could have charged up to 10%, but we wanted to keep that as minimal, administrative charges as minimal as possible, so as to facilitate as much funding going out into the community as possible. The first allocation that we made was to the 15 towns. So the 15 towns in Barnstable County each got their own ARPA allocations from the Treasury. But in addition to that, of our $41 million, we've allocated another $10 million to be spread amongst the towns. And that process has gone very well. All 14 of the 15 towns have already applied for and received their allocation from us, or in the process of doing so. And there's one town that is also in the process of making those decisions. So the towns are very much on track with the appropriating and applying for through us their funding from us. So that's 10 million of the 41 million right there has been appropriated and is almost out the door. Now, I'm going to just go through this. What the towns are largely using those funds from us for is for large-scale infrastructure water projects, water-related projects, comprehensive wastewater planning, or sewering systems, and so on, and very appropriately so, because it's well understood here on Cape Cod that our real existential problems are housing and water quality, and you're not going to solve housing until you can solve your water quality problems and the concentration and management of wastewater. So the investments, the majority of the investments, as I understand it, from the town's point of view, then as well as from the remainder of the funds that we're investing in the community, are mostly for wastewater and housing. If you really stand back and look at it. So going through our allocations, there's been, of the 41.4 million, 10 million allocated to the towns, a further allocated to small and medium-sized grants, largely targeted at nonprofit organizations. We wanted to make sure that we weren't just investing the funds in larger infrastructure-related projects, and that the community organizations, nearly all of whom had served clients had directly impacted by COVID from the health or community services point of view, had access and availability to the funding opportunities as well. And we were successful in that. We recently awarded 20 organizations here on Cape Cod, providing services on Cape Cod, with from that $5 million allocation, $5 million tranche. We're very pleased with that. Most of those applications were for child care, housing-related issues, community services, public health. You know, it's really a Maslow's hierarchy of need type of approach. You know, food security, food pantries, and so on, which we were very gratified to have a large number of very good applications, and we're able to spread these funds as much as practical to these community-based organizations.
So speaking of that medium-sized grant program,
Yes.
My understanding is it's about $5 million was set aside for that.
Not about, exactly $5 million.
Exactly $5 million. However, when the applications first went out, about $15 million worth of projects had applied. There's simply so many.
You're very well informed, but it's even a larger magnitude than that. We had 122 letters of intent we received for $37 million.
Well, that's quite a lot. That's a lot more than what I was my numbers that I was going off of.
Which speaks to a level of thoughtfulness and a level of need out there across a variety of different sectors. We invited 40, based on various criteria, we invited 40 to apply, actually apply for the funding, and that's where there were 40 projects that were invited to apply, and their applications came in still at $15 million worth. $4 or $5 million opportunity. So our criteria were applied, and we were able to fund to some extent 20 of the 40 applicants. So we're very glad about that.
That is great to hear. I've been listening in on those commissioner meetings, the assembly meetings, and there has been a lot of discussion about, for those that didn't make the cut just by the criteria you've had to apply, you just cannot provide enough funds to everybody. But there were some other options that have been brought up by yourself as well as commissioners.
Sure.
Do you mind highlighting some of the ways you're helping out those who might not be benefiting from this route?
Yes. What we had promised all along is that we would be serving up a web-based location to which applicants, ARPA, unsuccessful ARPA applicants, as well as the community, can go to see various funding sources by category, really, are these local funding entities, federal, state, national, and then by sector as well. And if your listeners would go to capecod.gov, capecod.gov/ARPA, that web page is live now, and it's not going to be reserved only for ARPA-related issues. We've constructed it in such a way that it can stay evergreen until the next thing happens.
God forbid, but emergencies do happen.
It will become an ongoing source of information for the community on funding sources of funding across various sectors, ARPA or not. And so we're going to maintain that into the future as well. So it's capecod.gov/ARPA to find our ARPA page, and then you'll find a link there to that further support.
Speaking of future-proofing, essentially, or the silver linings that can come out of the forward-thinking resources that you have,
Yes.
Has this been an opportunity to highlight to the state and federal government, like, look, you gave us the $41 million, we easily spent it. We know exactly what topics we want to put that money towards. Do you think that this is a good way to maybe advertise to them, like, hey, we still kind of have a need. The 41's not quite enough. Do you think that maybe we can push that forward a little bit further?
That's a great question. Part of the process that we undertook as county government was to make sure we were thoughtful about our regional priorities and making sure that ARPA fit in with our overall initiative for solving them. So it's not the cart, it's not the horse driving, it's the horse pulling the cart. Our regional priorities of housing, water, public health services, and so on, were already well understood and being worked on. Coalitions stood up, and so on and so forth. The ARPA funding was brought to bear in appropriate ways in appropriate ways to those problems already well understood and underway. So the funding isn't driving the conversations. The conversations were in place, and the funding is being deployed tactically in order to support these particular issues that we have on Cape and their solutions. So, yes, it's been a way for us to demonstrate our preparedness to talk about these existential problems, housing and water. Really, a lot of it boils down to housing and water.
Yeah, the big two.
On Cape Cod, the challenges that all organizations are facing in recruiting and retaining workers gets back to housing, which gets back to water. It's all interrelated. And so the ARPA funds, although large, it's a large bolus of money, have been are nothing compared to the cost of actually solving these issues, but are being used strategically in order to further the conversations and the progress in those sectors.
Something I definitely wanted to ask, that was one of my later questions on my notes here, but I just wanted to ask, like, essentially, is your work over? Is it going to be over? Even once this ARPA program is finished and you allocate all the money, it sounds like that might just be the beginning for you guys when it comes to focusing on what resources are needed for the community, what issues still kind of persist.
Right.
Do you imagine just keeping this snowball rolling?
Absolutely. I mean, it's the role of county government to surveil surveil our community for needs and service needs, and try and predict those and supply solutions and structures in order to assist our towns and our community. So yes, it's part and parcel of the county's overall goal and reason for being. The reason we have a county government, the reason our county government received $41.4 million is because we're one of the last counties, if not the last, in Massachusetts that has robust county government serving the populace in a variety of ways. In the first couple of years of the pandemic, of the COVID pandemic, there will be others.
Unfortunately.
It was largely, a all of government public health effort, and that and Cape Cod accomplished that really, really well. We have already existing and well-practiced organization between towns that supply emergency response services. We have our first responders, public health officials, and so on. So at the beginning of the pandemic, it was necessarily a public health response, and government sort of supported that response. As the economic impacts of COVID began to be felt and funds started to flow from the federal government to support the economy, that's when you had the consideration of the ARPA legislation and these large sums of money flowing after that to ensure that the economic recovery maintained its momentum. As county government, in answer to your question, we will continue to perform this role, the role of grabbing money when it's available and being tactical about it in its expenditure. Definitely.
As well, we wanted to talk about a lot of this, the focus, the extreme nature of trying to keep track of everything and being so focused on this is because that there will be a federal audit at some point. So are we going to be safe? Is Barnstable County going to be all in the up and up in that regard?
Absolutely. I've always, in my professional career, I've always actually welcomed audits. I've never seen them as, we're not under threat of audit. We are under the certainty of audit because we are we've received a large sum of money, and so we will be subject to federal audit, as will any of the, any ARPA grantees that receive over $750,000 in federal funds across a particular year. So it's you'll be subject to single audit if your organization receives $750,000 or more in federal funds. This might be a digression that we might want to edit out. It might not be interesting to people.
Oh, but it means that we are assured. I mean, that is just but a
Gonna be
drop in the
audited.
bucket compared to the $41 million that we've received.
Yeah,
so easily
right.
we've crossed that threshold.
Yeah, for sure. Audits are always an opportunity. We are a public entity. Transparency is the watchword. Well, fine, audit.
I like it, the confidence.
We're very confident of the structures and the financial controls and whatnot that we have. It's our duty to have those in place, regardless of the size of the grant. Grants aside, we are funded by taxpayer money to a large extent. Our general fund is our public funds,
Right.
and so we have a duty to be transparent. And we are, the county is audited on an annual basis. Our books are audited as a matter of course, anyway.
Of course. But yeah, authenticity, watch, as you said before, just keeping a watch and making sure you guys are clear and concise and always trustworthy for your local government. So it's great to hear. Good to know that there's going to be this.
We've also engaged external auditors that are specialized in the ARPA processes and the ARPA legislation to oversee the funding decisions that are made and those funding distributions. So we have double coverage in that regard.
Excellent.
Yes.
You've already kind of touched on this, but the COVID emergencies have been rescinded by both the federal government and the state government. That was last month. We also wanted to talk more about from the county's point of view. How did things go? Do you mind kind of giving us this review, some of the immediate challenges, as well perhaps the transition to the digital space? We saw so many transformative things over COVID.
Yes.
So can you highlight some of the biggest changes or obstacles that the county had to face and maybe some of those benefits that we're now going to be seeing into the future?
Yeah, sure. Firstly and foremostly, we had a lethal pandemic arise quickly and spread around the world almost overnight. From its emergence in a wet market in China, late November, December, to a shutdown in mid-March by the time it got here. That's pretty quick. It used to take years for the plague to go around the world, back in the ship sailing days, right? So. Yeah. Now we have instantaneous impacts from communicable diseases. We had a commensurate, almost instantaneous response from the county point of view. We were able to shut down and pivot to an online and a virtual context almost immediately. Excuse me. Our IT department had us set up with the software that we needed. Myself and our director of the health department, Sean O'Brien, sat down together in February, looked at each other and said, well, this is going to be a thing. We better get ready. And Sean is our public health expert in the county. I also have public health training, which is how I come to my career path, really. But so we knew what we were looking at, and we were able to prepare, to assist the county government to prepare to function immediately to provide that pivot. We went to a remote work environment, as did almost everyone, I'm sure, with the exception of frontline workers who did not have that option and who had to show up at their jobs in order to continue services and to make a living. So that should be acknowledged that it's those that were able to pivot to a remote work environment are amongst the fortunate in being able to have done so. Frontline workers did not have that luxury, nor did our first responders. Having said that, I think that the county pivoted well, as did really everyone else. It was really important to have the technology available to do that. You had broadband access, obviously computer access, and the software, and Zoom was already in in the world,
Right.
in the business world. Microsoft Teams was already in the business world. And those immediately became an essential workforce tool. We did well coordinating on an emergency basis amongst county agencies and our partners to try and flood with resources the needs that we were being asked to support.
Mm-hmm.
I think there are many silver linings to this. One of which is it was already an exceptional relationship with the State Department of Public Health and other state departments of this and that. The DESE, the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, DHCD. There was the housing people, the departments supporting handicapped persons and people with disabilities. All of those agencies were looking to town and county government to be able to make sure that people were being served. And so that two-way conversation, that it almost equalized the conversations. The state departments and state entities needed us to be successful, as much as we needed them in many cases. And it's particularly true with the public health department. The relationships with the state public health department have deepened and broadened, and we're very grateful for that. We're very grateful for the state support that we received. I also have to point out that county government teamed up with the nonprofit sector, for-profit sector, chambers of commerce, first responders, the realtors organization. All economic impacts being felt were represented at a table, and we had sometimes there were daily calls during the height of the pandemic, but weekly calls, making sure we were providing as much coordination and support as possible. That yielded enormous benefit for the community, not only on Cape Cod but the islands. We did as much as we could, particularly from a public health surveillance point of view, to include the islands as well, because they don't exist in a vacuum, nor do we. So the public-private aspect of the pandemic also was really how do I want to put it? It was heartening to behold how quickly we came together as a region, and importantly, our legislative delegation to the state were phenomenal in helping us access resources, calling meetings, participating in meetings across the board, all of them. Senator Sear, Senator Moran, Sarah Peake, Representative Exaros. I'm going to forget someone if I try and, Tim Whalen at the time as well. Dylan Fernandez. I'm sure Mr. Vieira. Extraordinary work. Pick up, we had all the access we needed to our legislative delegation to get our needs met. And we didn't abuse that. We never cried wolf. If we needed something, they could rely on the fact that it was necessary, it had been well thought through, and we had a good idea of what it would cost. So,
the task force. I remember those.
Yes.
That's
what I'm referring.
Those calls, I believe, in the morning as well.
So that's what I'm referring to. Those were convened by Julian, for example, Senator Sear. So
I remember opening them up in the morning, and then Sean O'Brien would come on, or yourself, I believe, a few times. As well.
I was the county's acting epidemiologist during the pandemic.
Yes,
and remains so. Yeah. We are hiring a contract epidemiologist now to pull things together and to further our epidemiologic processes.
A role that I'm sure a lot of people in the past few decades had overlooked or just assumed was a cushy job, but after the COVID-19 pandemic, an epidemiologist suddenly is now a very important role indeed.
Everyone knows what an epidemiologist is at this point. Yeah, they're in short supply. An epidemiologist, for your listeners, is an individual who makes sure to understand the disease patterns in an area, both infectious disease, chronic disease, behavioral health disease patterns, and increasingly health disparities, making sure we understand health disparities and the reasons for those as well. So
Right.
that's what an epidemiologist is. It's a time-honored profession, and I encourage people to take a look at it. We need epidemiologists.
It is. It's so but you touch on this as well. I wanted to talk with you about you yourself. So this was a transition period for yourself as well, because you stepped into this role that you currently have just in the past few years. And I wanted to ask about that transition, how things have gone, what's different between the two roles, and what are your kind of goals as you continue in this position?
No, thank you. It's been a very gratifying transition. The county's confidence in me has been. I'm hugely grateful.
Mm-hmm.
I came to the county as a policy and data analyst working in the Human Services Department under Beth Albert. At the time, was the Human Services Director. And Beth became our county administrator in 2021. And I was the acting director of the Human Services Department in her absence. And then they opened the position for an assistant county administrator in the summer of 21. I gave it a great deal of thought, and I applied. And there was a good slate of applicants and talented people. I think that my ability to anticipate, discuss, and present information that's of relevance and timely is one of the reasons that I'm useful to the county in this role as assistant county administrator. There really does need to be, it's like an enormous funnel of information and possibility out there. To bring it down to the right point in time to make a recommendation and support our elected officials in taking action is something that you learned over the course of a professional career, and I appear to have done so sufficiently to interest the county in my qualifications.
Well, congratulations. Very belated, but congratulations at this point.
Thank you.
And it is indeed, it's very interesting because, as you mentioned before, because Barnstable County is a very unique setup. A lot of people born and raised here might not realize that Barnstable County, the county having this much responsibility or information to crunch, is very unique across Massachusetts and the nation as a whole.
Yes.
So it's very interesting to see. Have you worked in other locations and can speak to the differences?
I worked in another county. Prior to this, I was a public health director in a large border county in Arizona, one of the counties that border Mexico. I was public health director in Cochise County, Arizona. And in most of the rest of the country, county government is still an important fixture in running a region. The state delegates many different authorities. State government typically will delegate its authority to perform various public functions that it's required to perform to a county government to do that. I won't, if I try and approximate how that worked here in Massachusetts, I'll get it wrong. But I should study up on it, I'm sure. But at a certain point in time, somewhat recently, the state of Massachusetts did away with most counties as county governments, and those delegated authorities went to the towns themselves. So we have town rule, and we have very strong town structure here on Cape Cod. Our 15 towns are sort of robust, responsible, talented, good at what they do, and great partners for us as a county. But there are roles that our county government is able to take of a regional nature, which I think assists our towns, and that remains a boon to our region. So I'm supportive of county government, not only because I work for county government.
All right, no biased side here.
Yeah, right. But it seems like a reasonable design for the delegation of authority and for regional consideration of problems on a regional basis that only a town-centric focus might be too parochial. Sometimes you need regional scope and regional purpose in order to get things done and to plan accordingly. So.
It is very interesting, especially we're an island. It's a peninsula with the two bridges on and off, so the regionality, essentially, of this place is just so unique.
It's interesting. In the other county that I worked in, it was very sparsely populated. It's a county, Cochise County, Arizona is the size of, the land mass is the size of Rhode Island and Connecticut combined.
Wow.
With only the same, but very similar population to here, about 200-some thousand people on it. So very spread out amongst basically 5 different towns in Cochise County that are kind of on their own with regard to dealing with their situation and resources. So it was almost like having to work with 5 different islands, but islands bobbing in the desert.
Right.
So it's actually quite analogous to our situation here. We do have geographic constraints here relative to Beacon Hill, that we are a remote, many of our communities are quite remote from there geographically. And so there are analogies there that I think are important to recognize, both for the needs of the Cape and the islands.
I'm afraid that is coming up about on time now for us, but thank you so much for joining us in the studio, giving us the update on ARPA. It's great to know that's pretty much reached its final leg. Is there anything else that you wanted to highlight for our listeners while I still have you?
All right, I'll pause a minute because I didn't get to go through the remainder of the funds.
Oh, sure.
So if you want to you might want to edit that in.
Excellent. I'd love to.
Okay.
Yeah, by all means. Let me just put a little timer on here, but we can just keep going right on through and just keep saying the various funds. So what are the other topics that you were looking to? Here, maybe let's give it a short second.
So something like, take us through how the $41.4 million's been allocated.
Sure.
You've already mentioned
Excellent.
$10 million and $5 million. How about the remainder of the funds?
Yeah, let's do that. Thank you so much. I'm trying to remember I'm feeling the force. Obi-Wan, my video producer upstairs, was saying, if you have to make an edit, do it in a certain way. Okay, so we're going to do the same thing where we're just going to take about 4 or 5 seconds, and I'll just ask the question of, do you mind elaborating more on how those funds are being allocated? And then we'll just slip that in somewhere in the middle. Or perhaps maybe to make it a more natural cut, maybe I just say, how about we phrase this in the form of just before we wrap up, I just wanted to elaborate more on exactly how those $40 million is being allocated, and then we'll end with that and have that.
That sounds great. Would you prefer? I should have asked you this when we started. Would you prefer I look at you or the camera?
Oh, actually,
or it's a combination.
All right, what you've been doing this whole time is awesome.
All right,
so
great.
That's actually by all means keep continuing.
All right.
But just for the sake of, because this way he can edit it just by chopping out this part that we're doing right now, and
Great.
I'll just he'll zoom in on me, or we'll just fade, and I'll just say before we wrap up, and so. Here we go. Watch out. Okay. All right. I'm afraid that's about all the time that we have at this point, but before we finish out this episode, I want to talk with you more about exactly how that $41 million has been fully allocated. Can you just elaborate more for our listeners about where exactly all the money has been going? You mentioned some already, but I just wanted to, for our listeners, elaborate.
I'd be glad to. So I have my notes here, because one wants to get it right. So $41.4 million, $10 million to the towns, to our 15 towns, $5 million to the nonprofit sector, really small and medium-sized grants between $100,000 and $500,000. A further $11.4 million to affordable housing, to support affordable housing projects. $13.7 million to Barnstable County government departments, largely there as water quality related, some housing, and also some to the county dredge is in that amount, and as I said, about $1.2 million to administrative costs. And if you add that all up on the back of your envelope at home, you're at about $41.4 million. So
for those at home doing their own audit of their local governments. But thank you so much for elaborating more on that. Great to see all these programs getting the funds that they need and the resources that is going to be necessary to keep that county rolling smoothly.
Thank you very much, Grady.
So thank you again for joining me for this conversation in the studio. It's been a great conversation. Hope to have you back in soon as well.
Anytime. It's been my pleasure.
I'm Grady Colleen, and this has been Sunday Journal.